chapter 2. Last Sunday that we had class, one of the things we talked about in chapter 2, just to give a quick recap / end to that, is we talked about slaves being submissive, right, to their masters. And one verse that I guess I just neglected to include this, that I think really speaks a lot to how the Bible teaches us to think about slaves and masters. So that verse is, and I'm just going to offer this. We're not going to talk about it more this morning. I want to offer this verse just so you can look at it, just so you can have it in the back of your mind as you think about this topic. So 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 1 through 2 says, "Let as many bondservants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, so that the name of God and his doctrine may not be blasphemed." So, I mean, honestly, that's around the same type of thought that we had last time, so not much new there. Part of their being submissive to the master was so that the name of God wouldn't be blasphemed. So they're not causing a big uprising. They're stepping out of line. They're doing all this big uprising so that people would say, those people are pretty bad, and then the name of God would be blasphemed. Verse 2, though. "And those who have believing masters," remember they needed to be submissive to the just and the unjust master. That was one of the hard teachings here. But it says, "Those who have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they're brethren." They're believing masters, they're brothers. "But rather serve them, because those who are benefited are believers and beloved. Teach and exhort these things." And so it says, let them not despise the master because they are a believer. Now, why would it even need to say that or offer that? I mean, when do we look around at a brother and just randomly despise them? That shouldn't be taking place. So why did he have to say it here? They're probably despising that master because he's a believer, because they know this idea of slavery in the way that most slaves were treated was not in keeping with the teachings of God. So what that tells us about slavery as it's thought of in the Bible is that it wasn't okay for the master to go around mistreating the slave. The master thus has to treat them as a brother, and even though they're going to be served, they're going to be benefited as fellow believers and beloved. And so it's not right for anyone to be mistreated or for the Bible to be pushing that idea. Okay? So that's not in there. If you thought it was, hopefully this verse kind of helps you with that thought. Because I know that's a cause for a lot of controversy in the Bible. So again, that's 1 Timothy 6, verse 1 through 2. If you want to go in and check that out a little more, I think it really shows us a lot. To switch things up, we're back in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1. And remember, this is continuing off of that concept of slaves submitting to masters. So the first word or two, depending on your translation, says wives likewise, or maybe your version says likewise, wives. And then it says, "Be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives." Most of the chapters here that we've started with just one specific word that we believe to be pointing us back to the previous part of the text. So this one says, likewise, in the same manner. In the same manner of what?
What was already taught.
What was taught in chapter 2. Meaning, he's saying wives need to submit to their masters in the same way that slaves are being submissive to their masters. He's actually comparing those and associating them together, believe it or not. So that's one of the first teachings that we want to get from this. Now, just to forewarn you on this passage, I've got a whole lot of points here that I want to make, because this is one of, again, just like the slaves and masters, one of the more controversial and misunderstood verses in the Bible. And I really think that if we can understand it well, it's going to benefit us very well as well. So we'll spend quite a bit of time on it. I hope that if you have comments or questions, that you'll throw those out there. So we read in a lot of the New Testament, and also especially, this is said a lot in Romans, where Paul says there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, because there is no partiality with God. He's not partial to one or the other. Do we believe that? I do, but do you think possibly, after reading 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 3, that someone could start to get the idea, they'd say, no partiality? Yeah, right. Seems like to me he's pretty partial. Well, I believe that he's not. One of the proofs for that comes from verse 4, where he's going to say this about a woman who is trying to follow this teaching. This is, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. Here's the key point here in verse 4, which is very precious in the sight of God. Something here is showing to be very precious in the sight of God. Okay, if God is trying to teach this and put this teaching out there and have this submission here, because really, in all actuality, we think that he's just partial to men and he doesn't care what the women do because they're beneath. That's not what this teaches at all, is it? When, in all actuality, it says in verse 4 that it's something that's going to be very precious in the sight of God. But that's what I want to be. That's something I'm going to be going after. That very thought, if that's going to be laid on to me. Now, this is talking about women, but being precious in the sight of God should be desirable by all. Yes.
I think that probably in my eyes what it means is that it's not as much as the person as it is how they portray themselves. Like being humble and loving and, the whole works. And being Christian-like.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way it shows the person that's being bad to them what a person should really be like, and Christian-like.
There is a lot of teaching that's going to go on here. I think the rest of verse 1 here speaks to that very well. And so sometimes when we read a passage like this, we say, okay, one is submissive to the other, and we start to make assumptions about why that would be the case. I think that's very dangerous for us to do. We start to think, okay, why is the wife submissive to the husband? It must be, here's something you might think, oh, it must be because they're, intellectually and spiritually beneath that of the man. One might think that, okay? Well, if they're being submissive in the same way that slaves are being submissive to the masters, and also if you keep backing up in verse 2, did we not talk about being submissive to the government and the ordinances that are out there? Do we really think that because a slave needs to be submissive to the master, that necessarily that slave must be less spiritual than the master? Probably not. How do you feel about let's ask this question. How do you feel about our current government? I feel like we need to be submissive, but I don't feel less spiritual than they are. I mean, can I maybe get an amen on that? I mean, I also don't feel less intellectual oftentimes than what I think the government is. Okay, so I don't think that's necessarily part of it. So that's probably not a good assumption to place. based on this teaching that they're obviously less spiritual or less intellectual. In fact, what does it teach us in the rest of verse 1? That it seems like to me the wives have come to this faith, and yet the husbands haven't quite come to the faith here. They haven't obeyed the word, and it's talking about winning them over. It sounds like to me that the woman here is the one who has obeyed the word, and the man has not. So that ought to teach us something right there. So don't make assumptions as to why God may be teaching this way. Another thing that this is teaching us here in verse 1, we need to understand that Peter did not say, he did not say, husbands, you need to take control of your wives. You need to put them into submission. That's not what it said, did it? It said wives. This is not speaking to husbands. Really not speaking to us really at all yet. It's speaking to the wives. And so, if you have to be the husband or the man that walks up and says, I'm the one that's in control and I wear the pants in this relationship, if you have to say that, if you have to verbalize that and try to demand that, you probably don't wear the pants. you probably don't, you're probably not in control in that situation. That's just my thoughts on the matter. But this is a position that it's asking women to take the initiative here and to put themselves into that position. And it's something that's done willingly, and it's something that's done out of their humility and submission. We actually see right now, if you look into a lot of places in the Middle East here, where we obviously read this passage and thought that it said, husbands, take control, beat women into submission. When we understand this verse in that way, it doesn't look too pretty. And in fact, the God that they follow ends up getting blasphemed and misunderstood, or blasphemed and put in a bad light, basically, because of what they're doing. That's not what this is calling on us to do. In fact, it speaks to the wives. He named who the audience here is. They are the ones to be submissive. So, question, what happens if you don't have this in a marriage relationship? Well, that might take us a long time to answer. There could be a lot of negative things. But what can be done about it? Does the husband then have the right to say, well, this one didn't pan out, I'm going to go back to the wife's store and pick me out another one? No, that's not how it works, is it? So what happens when we don't have this in a marriage? Well, a couple of things. One, you're not living up to the potential that God set out. Two, you're going to have a struggle in the relationship that's probably not going to be resolved. There's going to be a constant contention between the two, and they're not going to be headed in the direction that God would have planned for them. Another question people often ask here, what if the woman is the more spiritual one in the relationship? Okay? I've heard that in often cases. I know of a couple people where they've asked me about that particular question, or they believe they're in that particular situation. What if the woman is more spiritual? Does that negate or take away from what is being taught here? Well, I actually believe that that's the case that is taking place in verse 1, is it not? Wives, be submissive to your husband, that even if some do not believe, well, the wife apparently has come to God and the husband has not. Therefore, who is the more spiritual one at this point in time? the woman. Okay? But I do believe that it's talking about in all marriages, right? There are some cases where maybe a husband does not believe, but that doesn't mean that all don't. I think there are many husband-wives where they're both Christians, obviously. But
Don't you think that's where this being submissive comes into, that he can see the light in the woman and maybe lead him to Christ?
oh yeah, that's exactly what we're getting at here. That they're going to see the example that they set, and they're going to be won by that. So that word that says that they may be won means that they're seeing that, they're deciding, I want to be a Christian, I want to be a part of that. Yes?
The woman should go ahead and follow the man as long as he's not telling her to do something that's against God's laws.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very good point that you bring up, because remember we started with the word likewise at the beginning of chapter 3. He's comparing it to a slave being submissive to the master. It's referring to us being submissive to the government. What happens when the government says, okay, Islam is now your religion?
That's when you don't follow him.
I ain't following that. But it says be submissive to the government.
The woman is.
Not in that case, because we're following God first, right? And so the woman has already, it seems like, taken a little bit of a step here to go out and profess their faith in God, whereas the man hasn't. Okay? Yes.
Woman is the hub of the wheel. Everything revolves around her in your home and everything. She takes care of the children, she takes care of the home, she takes care of the husband. So she's an example to all the rest of them.
I think that oftentimes that is true if the woman decides to do that, right?
Yeah.
This is part of a teaching here that doesn't always get followed, right? But it needs to be taught. And so as they're submissive to the man, he also is head of the house, right? And he tries to lead them in the right direction. But also, that ain't always the case either, is it? Sometimes the man hasn't put on the Word of God. And so, in both cases, we're pointing to what God desires. Man is head of the house. Woman's being submissive to the man. Both are headed towards God. That's the ideal, but we don't always have it, right? And so we want it to head in that direction. Another thought here is that submission should be done willingly. That should be something that the woman sees this teaching and decides, God desires this? Okay, that's what I want to do. This is not something where it should be thought of as demeaning and you've been put down. If it's something that you're choosing and God desires it from you and He thinks it's precious, this is something that's good in the eyes of God. He doesn't show partiality. Remember that is true, that He's not actually partial to the one or the other, but He has a design for how you ought to work together in serving Him and raising your family. Again, this is something that's being taught of the husband and wife in the home. This is not necessarily an implication for a business or a social structure, but he's talking about you, husband, wife, in your home. How are you going to do things? And homes are where I think this nation is either being built up or lost. Don't you think the degeneration and the tearing down of the home is a big part of the reason why America is the situation it's in right now? No respect for this passage. No respect for living the way God has taught us. It's fallen apart because we don't have good homes.
If you don't respect yourself and others, you can't respect anything else.
Yeah.
You have to have respect for yourself first, love yourself.
If you don't respect God, you're out before you started, on that too. One of the things that is good to point out here too, it says that it says that even if some do not obey the word, he's talking about a specific word. He puts what's called a definitive article here in front of word, meaning we're talking about the gospel here. We're talking about the word of God, a specific teaching word that has come to them. It says that the wife, without a word, may win over the husband by the conduct that they present. I think there's a little bit of a play on words here, but we need to make sure that we're understanding what that means, okay? It says the husband obeyed not the word, and the woman won him over without a word. Okay, it's not that she's winning him over without notion of it involving the gospel. It's saying that she can say this without even saying a word. And I think that that's pretty impressive. So there's no definitive article in front of the word whenever it's referring to how the woman is winning over the husband.
Well, mine does say the word. They also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives.
Okay, say it again about midway through the verse.
Okay. They also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives.
Okay, so you're reading out of the King James Version. Okay, that's something we're going to talk about next. Okay, it also uses the word with the conversation of the wife, right? Okay, I think that is a very bad translation in this case. I think the word would be better translated as conduct. Okay, a word study on that same Greek word that's used there. If you'll go look at 1 Timothy 4:12, 1 Peter 2:12, 1 Peter 1:15, Galatians 1:13, James 3:13, you can see where that same word is being used, and it's clearly talking about conduct, actions, not conversation. Now, is your conversation a part of your conduct? Absolutely, it's a part of it, but it's not all of it. Okay, even this very passage here gets into when they observe your chaste. Your version says conversation again, right? But I think it'd be better if it says they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. They talk about the adornment and the way that they live their life. It's not necessarily the words that are coming out of their mouth. Otherwise, it would have said when they hear your chaste conversation rather than when they observe it. Okay? So the word here really means conduct. Okay? Now, does that mean that they have to try and fully convert the man without ever speaking ever? Okay, I don't think that it means that. There's a couple reasons why I believe that. Okay? If you're going about converting someone, there's going to come a point in time where they're going to ask you about maybe, let's say, baptism. Okay? And let me give you this example. I've been training my dog. Okay? I try to teach my dog how to sit. Well, if he's never learned that word sit, I say, sit, and he just looks at me and wags the tail. Okay, doesn't know that word yet. Okay, so I eventually had to wait until the dog sat down, and then I got really, really excited and gave him a treat. Then eventually I taught him the word, which was sit. Now they get it. Okay. I think if you finally got the man ready, he's ready to be converted. He says, "What do I need to do now?" You'd have to. It's like the same thing. You'd have to go down to the water, and I can't tell you what to do, but maybe I can show you and just repeatedly jump in the water and hope that maybe they get the picture. Okay. I think that what this means is that you're ultimately going to win over the husband without a word. In fact, that's going to be your best hope for doing this. Okay? The husband, you're not necessarily having to try to get together this big teaching. Okay? Whenever I go to study with someone, I get it all prepared, I get all my notes ready, and I outline this perfect presentation. Isn't that kind of what you do, Corey? You get ready this perfect presentation. I'm going to show them the gospel. And it's going to be all about what I say. Okay? But he's saying here that woman has the opportunity here where it's going to be more about their actions. And that's going to speak to them way more than the words. Do we not say the phrase actions speak louder than words? The best way, according to God, for a woman to win over the husband is through her conduct, through her actions, through her example, rather than her words. I think that should be inspiring to all the women. I think oftentimes we read this passage and they go away feeling like they've been put down, not inspired. I feel like this should inspire us. I really do.
You've probably heard it said many times that there's no better sermon preached than one that a person lives.
That's
The
right.
way he lives. This conversation means their behavior, how they act.
Yep.
And the husband sees that. Not only the husband sees that, but the rest of the world sees that.
That's right. And so, if my examples didn't really hit home, I hope maybe this one will be the most clear. It's talking about the process of winning them over. Okay, the husband is not obedient to the word. He hasn't considered that. Your words are not going to be as effective. Okay, it's going to be your conduct and your actions that win him over. And so, there's going to come a time, at least in this situation here, we're hoping, if they're going to be won over, your actions are going to do that. And at some point, someday, the husband's going to walk up to the wife and say, I've been seeing the way you're acting. I've been seeing the way you live. I've been seeing the way you follow your God. He's not mine yet, he's yours. And I want to be a part of that. What should I do? That's called winning over right there. But if you're telling me that the woman at that point, he says, what should I do next? And the woman has to go, well, I can't tell you. Because without a word, okay, that's not what it's about. It's not about you're a mime and you can't ever say anything ever again, but your focus should be on the actions, the lifestyle, and setting that example. That's going to be the most powerful thing. Later on, you have more conversations, but where are you going to put your focus?
What does be accompanied by fear mean?
Okay, that's in verse 2. Okay, so let's see. Verse 2: when they observe your chaste conduct, accompanied by fear. Okay, you bring up a great point. We still got a good amount of time. So, when we talk about this fear here, I don't think necessarily that's talking about fear of the husband, but rather fear of God. Okay? We ought to fear God. It's a healthy, respectful fear of God. That is something that you want the husband to see when they see the chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Obviously, there's something that has changed their life. It's leading them down a course that they're sticking to no matter what. That's going to win them over. They say, I want to be a part of that. I want to join in. The toughest part about the last three teachings in 1 Peter, and where this is where it's all going to get kind of sewn together, is it talks about submission. Us to the governing authorities, slaves to masters, wives to their husbands. Nobody wants to be submissive. Everyone wants to be the one in charge, or they want to be the leader or the top dog. Okay? And he talks about this fear. I think the best way to explain this is to look at the life of Solomon through the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay? Solomon was top dog. He was the king. Okay? You ask the question, okay, who was Solomon submissive to? Nobody. He's the king. He's got however many wives, he's got concubines, he's got all the riches. Everyone's submissive to him. Okay? He literally doesn't have to submit to anybody if he doesn't want to. He's got all this control and power and wealth and all this. And what was it worth in the end? What did he say? He says, really, this is meaningless. And the whole duty of man was to fear God and keep his commandments. That's really your only task. And so, if you're a person struggling with submitting to the authorities, or if you're a slave who's having trouble submitting to your master, or if you're a woman who says, I ain't submitting to no man, I'm my own woman. You're having trouble with all these positions that you may be in. You need to think of Solomon in Ecclesiastes, where he said, you know, it wasn't all it was made up to be. And really, all I had to do was to fear God and to keep his commandments. Not focused about me and position and power and who's in leadership and who's in control, but rather to submit and fear God alone. That's I think a key point for us understanding and also accepting this passage. So, it's about the conduct, speaking the loudest. That's how you're going to be the most successful. A couple more motivations for this, verse 3 and 4. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. If we're going to be the people that are claiming, hey, we're going to live for eternity, we're going to live with God, this is going to be never ending, it's not going to fade, shouldn't we think that way on the earth here? Where are you just after this beauty that fades? You know, if you read the Proverbs, especially chapter 31, it talks about this fading beauty, this beautiful woman of her youth. It faded away, but she had an unfading beauty. This is what we're after. This is what in God's eyes is very precious in his sight. And so this adornment here is merely outward. God doesn't look at the outward appearance and judge a man. He looks at the inward. Same with women. All right? He's looking at the inward. And so he wants that to be your focus. And so we focus on that hidden person of the heart, the inward person. It's the incorruptible beauty. Never fades. A couple of years, You add a couple decades to it, it's still there. It's still incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. And so it's pretty awesome to see what God deems as important. But sometimes we don't deem the same things to be important, do we? We're focused on, who's in control, who's in the position. Okay? Some people deem this position as the coveted position, up here speaking, as if I'm somehow above you. It's not that way at all. It's not that way at all. We place positions that God doesn't place. In fact, God said, what? He shows no partiality. Even in this passage, that still rings true. One of the thoughts I thought of while I was studying for this passage, I was at a church camp a couple years ago as a counselor. And I was in charge of the real young ones. We did day camp. Their ages about 6 to 11. Okay? Very, very young, very wild, and just kind of annoying, to be honest. But we had a lot of fun. I was a coach of one team. Our other counselors divided up, and we had different teams. We played a game of kickball. This was on the last day where they're already kind of worn out, and they're ready to go home. It's at the end of the day, and it's a tough position. They've probably never been away from home that long. And anyhow, we played this kickball game. My team lost. Go figure. There was this little boy who was on my team, and his brother, younger brother, was on the other team that won. And let me tell you, when we lost, he threw the world's biggest hissy fit. It was just whining and crying. I mean, just throwing a big baby fit. Now, ages 6 to 11, I'd say he was about 8. And, it's normal for kids that young to still throw a fit, okay, every once in a while. But this was out of the ordinary. This is a little above and beyond, where it was getting to be a little bit shameful. But I went over and talked to him, and he was in hysterics. It took him a long time to even listen to what I was saying and getting words out. But he did not want to lose to his younger brother. And I think also he wanted to, we formed a relationship throughout the week. He wanted to impress me. Well, I kept telling him, I was like, look, when we play a game, who's the most impressive, the winner or the loser? He said, the winner. And he kept crying a little more. I said, okay, that's what we think of normally. But I said, I want you to think about what I think of, what I was looking at. I said, there were some people on the other team that won. I said, I was not impressed with them. I said, I wasn't impressed by them at all. There were a couple that were running around, in your face, we won. I said, I wasn't impressed by that. I thought I was actually pretty ashamed of them. But then there were some on the winning team who went around and congratulated the other people. I said, okay, I was impressed. Not because they won, but because their actions were admirable. I said, there's even people on the losing team, the losers. I said, some of them impressed me. That congratulated the other team for their win. I said, I was impressed by that. I said, but you went over here and you threw a fit. You didn't congratulate anybody. I said, the losing was not what didn't impress me. I said, it was the way you handled it. I said, you have the opportunity still to impress me, even though you lost. I said, you need to go tell your brother he played a good game and congratulations. Well, he cried some more, and then he eventually went and said, the things that we think are impressive to God are often completely off base. You say, but how are we supposed to know? How are we supposed to know how God will be impressed by me? Well, he left us some clues. Here it is. That in a woman, the beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit is precious in the sight of God. The longer we go and we don't accept that, and we are seeking some other thing as a way to impress God, we probably miss the point. Just like the young kid at the church camp. And so I hope that that's something that, we study these texts so we learn. We learn these things, and hopefully we come to grips with it. And if we do that, we're going to be far, far better off. Tough teaching, it's mainly for the wives. The Bible also has a lot to say about the husbands. If we're doing our job, men, I don't want to go away necessarily from this passage, but if we're doing our job right, this ought to be the easiest thing in the world for the women to do. But if we're not treating them like Christ treated the church, we're going to put them in a position that they're not going to want to be in, and it's going to be a never-ending struggle. And it's going to end in something that's not going to be good in the sight of God. And so we all have our challenge. We all have our teaching here. Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments on this? Well, again, tough text to kind of battle through. Hope that I handled it correctly, scripturally. I hope that if you have any questions or thoughts, or you think that maybe I was off base on a couple points, I'd like to know that. I'd like to get to have that conversation to where maybe we will be mutually benefited. Maybe that I may learn something that I did not. Hope that is true. Hope that you'll study this for yourself and learn from it.